In September of 2014, a father and his teenage son vanished during what should have been a simple weekend fishing trip in the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest of Oregon. Their truck was later discovered deep on a Forest Service road, abandoned, intact, food still on the camp stove, but no trace of the two who should have been there. No footprints, no blood, just silence. For nearly a decade, the case haunted locals, investigators, and the boy's mother alike. Some said it was an accident. Others suspected something far more deliberate, something organized, something that did not begin and did not end with David and Lucas Carter. What really happened in those woods, and whether it is still happening, is a question that does not have a clean answer. Not yet. The morning came in softly, the way mornings do in places that have not yet learned to hurry. Light filtered through the Douglas firs in long, pale columns, catching motes of dust and pine pollen suspended in the still air. The river ran low and clear, the way it always did in early September, before the autumn rains arrived to swell it back to something serious. Along the bank, two figures sat in folding chairs, with fishing lines trailing into the current, and the world, for a moment, felt entirely uncomplicated. David Carter had driven 9 hours to get here. He had planned the trip for 3 months, circling the dates on the kitchen calendar with a red marker, the way his father used to do before their own camping trips, back when Oregon was a place of pure wonder rather than a destination chosen with quiet deliberation. He was 41 now, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of stillness about him that people sometimes mistook for coldness until they saw him with his son. With Lucas, the stillness opened into something else entirely. Patience, attention, a quality of listening that most adults forgot to offer children. Lucas was 14, slight for his age, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's habit of going quiet when he was thinking hard about something. He kept a journal, had kept one since he was 9, filling spiral-bound notebooks with observations so precise they sometimes startled David when he read them. Not because Lucas asked him to read them, but because the boy left them open on the kitchen table the way other children left homework, as though the words needed air. They had been on the river since 7 in the morning. A thermos of coffee between David's boots, a bottle of orange juice wedged in the chair arm beside Lucas. The river made its low, steady sound. Somewhere above them, a woodpecker worked at a snag, the knocking carrying cleanly through the cool air. Lucas had his line in but wasn't watching it. He was watching the far bank. "Getting anything?" David asked, not because he expected news, but because he liked hearing his son's voice out here, away from screens and noise and the residue of the divorce that still clung to their apartment in Portland like smoke from a fire nobody had properly put out. "Not yet," Lucas said. He was quiet a moment. "Dad." "Yeah?" "There was somebody on that ridge yesterday evening, when we were setting up camp." David looked at him. "Hunter, probably. Season opens next week." Lucas shook his head slowly, not in contradiction, but in the way he shook it when he was unsatisfied with an explanation. "They weren't moving like a hunter. They were just standing there, watching us." David looked across the river at the ridge in question. Dense timber, shadow layered on shadow beneath the canopy. Nothing moved. "Could have been a hiker," he said. "People come through here." "I know," Lucas said, and returned his eyes to the water. But he reached into the front pocket of his jacket and pulled out his journal, setting it on his knee. He didn't open it. He just rested his hand on the cover, the way a person rests a hand on something they want to keep close. That evening, David cooked over the propane stove, while Lucas sat at the folding table outside the truck, writing by the last of the daylight. David had borrowed his brother's pickup for the trip, a dark green Ford with a camper shell, roomy enough for 2 sleeping bags, a cooler, and the kind of organized chaos that accumulates on a camping trip by the end of the second day. Boots by the rear bumper. A damp towel hung over the side mirror. A topographic map spread across the dashboard with 2 circles marked in pen where they planned to fish the following morning. David set a bowl of chili in front of his son and sat down across from him. Lucas looked up, smiled briefly, and closed the journal. "What were you writing?" David asked. "Just notes," Lucas said. "About the light, the way it hit the trees this afternoon." David nodded. He watched his son eat, watched the last gold drain from the sky above the tree line, watched the shadows reach across the clearing and touch the edges of the truck. The river was quieter now, its sound dropping with the cooling air. An owl called once from somewhere to the north. "It's good out here," Lucas said. "Yeah," David agreed. "It is." They washed the bowls, zipped up the camper, and turned in by 9. The forest settled around them, its weight particular and enormous in the dark. David lay awake for a while, listening to his son's breathing slow into sleep, listening to the pines shift and murmur outside, feeling the specific peace of having your child close and safe and accounted for. He was almost asleep when he heard it. A sound that did not belong to the river or the trees or any animal he knew. A single soft footstep on the pine needles just outside the camper shell. Then nothing. He lay still, waiting. The silence pressed back in, dense and complete, and eventually he told himself it was a deer and closed his eyes. But in the morning, when he stepped out to start the stove, he found a stone placed neatly on the truck's hood. It was not a stone from the riverbank. Its surface was dry. Someone had carried it from somewhere else and set it there with deliberate care, in the night while they slept. He stood looking at it for a long time. Then he picked it up and threw it into the trees and did not tell Lucas what he had found. The call came in at 11:47 in the morning. A couple from Grants Pass had been driving the Forest Service road when they spotted the green Ford pickup pulled halfway off the track, its camper shell door hanging open, a folding chair lying on its side in the dirt nearby. They had stopped, called out, walked around the vehicle. Nobody there. State Trooper Sandra Voss arrived at the scene 40 minutes later. She was thorough by nature and unhurried by habit, a quality that had served her well in 15 years of working rural Oregon, where most situations either resolved quietly or did not resolve at all. She walked the perimeter of the truck before she touched anything, her boots silent on the needle mat. The camper's interior looked like a space mid-occupied. 2 sleeping bags, one rumpled and pushed to the side, one still zipped. A cooler with food inside, lid not fully closed. A propane stove on the tailgate, its valve open, the gas long since bled out. On the folding table inside, a bowl with the dried residue of a meal. And on the table's far corner, a spiral-bound notebook lying open. Voss read the last entries standing in the camper doorway, one hand on the frame. The handwriting was a teenager's, slightly cramped, leaning right. September 4th. I know he's trying not to worry me. Dad picked up that stone this morning and threw it away before he thought I could see. But I saw him find it. I saw his face. That person on the ridge yesterday, the one I saw, they weren't passing through. They came closer in the night. And I think there might be more than one of them. I can feel it. The way you feel weather before it arrives. Something is organized about this. Something is waiting. Voss read it twice. Then she stepped back out of the camper and called for backup. By nightfall, the Forest Service road was cordoned. Josephine County Sheriff's deputies had joined the state police. Dogs had been brought in from Medford. A helicopter from the Oregon National Guard swept the ridge lines as the last light failed, its searchlight cutting white columns through the canopy before the darkness swallowed everything. The truck had been registered to a Nathan Carter of Eugene, Oregon. Deputies reached him by phone at 8 in the evening. His brother David had borrowed the truck for a fishing trip with his son. David Carter, 41, Portland address. Lucas Carter, 14. They had left Portland on September 2nd and were due back on the 7th. David's wallet was in the glove compartment. His phone, locked, sat on the driver's seat. Lucas's backpack was in the camper, his sketchbook inside it, a charcoal drawing of the river, half finished on the last used page. His shoes were not there. Neither were David's boots. Sergeant Paul Morrow, who coordinated the first search operation, would say later in his official report that the scene presented no indicators of struggle. No blood, no torn fabric caught on the surrounding brush, no evidence of a vehicle other than the Ford having used the road in recent days, though the hard-packed dirt was uncooperative with tracks. The campfire ring nearby had been used and properly extinguished. The chairs and stove suggested a routine evening disrupted, not a confrontation. What it looked like, Morrow told a deputy quietly as they stood at the tree line with flashlights, was a place vacated in a hurry, but without any of the physical signs that hurry normally left behind. The forest had nothing to say. The dogs worked until midnight, losing the scent at a rocky outcrop 400 yards north of the truck. Beyond that, the trail simply ended, as though the two people they were searching for had walked to that point and then ceased to exist. The investigation expanded, and then, in the way of things with no evidence to feed it, began to contract. Federal search and rescue teams swept the ridges east and west. Divers searched the deep pools along the river. Volunteers walked transects through the timber in organized lines, calling names that the trees absorbed without echo. By the end of October, the primary search had been scaled back. By December, it had been reclassified from active search and rescue to open missing persons investigation. Sergeant Morrow continued working the case from his desk in Grants Pass, returning to it the way a man returns to a splinter he cannot fully dislodge. David Carter had been a building estimator for a Portland construction firm. No debt beyond ordinary mortgage and car payments. No history of substance issues. He had been divorced from Lucas's mother, Claire Brennan, for 3 years. The divorce had been described by both parties as civil, difficult, and ultimately agreed. Claire had remarried in 2013 and lived in Seattle. She had arrived in Josephine County within hours of being notified and had remained for 2 weeks, sitting across from Morrow with a coffee she did not drink, answering questions with the focused precision of someone who had decided that clarity was the only offering left to her. "He wasn't running," she said. "He wouldn't take Lucas somewhere without telling me. He was meticulous about that. After the divorce, he was almost overcautious about communication, about making sure I always knew where they were." Morrow believed her. The wallet in the glove compartment confirmed it. A man does not voluntarily vanish and leave his identification behind. Witness statements trickled in through October. A woman hiking the Upper River Trail 2 days before the disappearance described passing a man on the path who had stopped to let her go by. Middle-aged, she said, thin, wearing canvas work clothes despite the heat. He smiled at her, but his eyes didn't match the smile. She had felt uneasy enough to mention it to her partner when she returned to camp, but had said nothing to anyone official until the story appeared in the Medford Tribune. A teenager hunting with his uncle in the canyon above the service road told a deputy he had seen, the evening before the truck was found, 2 figures walking in the timber off-trail. He had taken them for hunters initially, but something about their movement had struck him as strange. They were not walking the way people walked when they were going somewhere. They were walking the way people walked when they were following something. When the deputy asked him to describe the figures more precisely, the boy said there had been 2, but he thought he had glimpsed a third, further back in the trees, standing still. "Just watching," he said, "not moving at all." By November, the rumors had found the shape they would keep for years. Something in those woods, people going in and not coming out. Morrow heard the variants at the diner, at the gas station, from a retired deputy who had worked the county since the 1980s, and who told him over coffee one evening that the ridgeline above Lost Creek had a history, though he was imprecise about its nature. "Just a feeling people get up there," the old deputy said, "like something's already claimed the territory." Morrow drove the service road alone on several November evenings after the official search crews had gone home, parking where the Ford had been found, walking a flashlight beam through the immediate timber. He found nothing. But on his third such visit, he became aware of a quality to the silence that he could not name. It was not the ordinary silence of forest at night, full of small sounds and movement. It was an attended silence, a silence with weight and direction. He stood at the tree line for a long time, then walked back to his car and sat with the engine running, his breath clouding in the cold, the lights on. Somewhere in those trees, he believed, David and Lucas Carter were present in some form. Whether that form was living or not, the forest was declining to say. Spring came early that year, pushing warm air up the river valleys and loosening the soil on the ridges above Lost Creek. The snowmelt was heavier than forecast, and by mid-March the creek was running hard and brown, eating at its banks, pulling exposed roots out into the current. A trail runner on the ridge path above the creek stopped when her dog pulled hard toward the embankment and would not come back. She found the dog at the base of a slide, where the soil had given way, its nose pressed to something pale protruding from the exposed earth. She clipped the leash and pulled it back, and stood looking at what she had found long enough to understand what it was. Then she called 911 from the top of the ridge, where the signal was reliable, her voice steady in a way she would be proud of later. By the following morning, the site was under State Crime Lab authority. Detective Iris Calloway had driven from Salem to take the case. She was 44, methodical, the kind of investigator who found narrative in physical evidence, the way other people found it in books, assembling from fragment and inference a story that the evidence itself was trying to tell. She stood at the base of the slide while technicians worked, her hands in her pockets against the cold. The remains were small. The technicians worked with extraordinary care, because small remains require it, because they carry more weight than their size suggests. Within 3 weeks, DNA confirmed what she had suspected from the beginning. The bones belonged to Lucas Carter. He had been 14 when he vanished in September of 2014. He had been found 4.7 miles from the service road where the green Ford had been discovered. 4.7 miles deeper into the forest than any of the original search grids had reached. Calloway pulled the original search maps and spread them on a folding table at the site. She traced the outermost search boundary with her finger, then moved her finger to the pin marking the recovery site. Something had moved Lucas after he died, or someone had moved him while he was still alive. The original grid had not been insufficient. It had been aimed in the wrong direction entirely. She called Claire Brennan in Seattle that evening. She sat in her car at the edge of the recovery site, engine off, the creek loud in the dark below, and she told Lucas's mother, in the clearest, most careful language she had, what had been found and what it confirmed. There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough that Calloway checked twice to make sure the call had not dropped. Then Claire said, in a voice that sounded as though it had been stripped of everything but the bare fact of its presence, "Tell me the rest." There was no rest to tell, not yet. But Calloway believed there would be. In the weeks that followed, the discovery reopened the case in ways that made the newspapers, and then the national crime feeds, and then the online forums where strangers assembled whatever facts were public and built structures of speculation around them. Lucas Carter found, 5 years after disappearance. New evidence overturns original search theory. Father still missing. The forums ran long into the nights, trading the few known details with the feverish economy of people who found in other people's tragedies some mirror of their own unease. Claire drove to Josephine County in April and met with Calloway at the sheriff's annex in Grants Pass.
She was thin, composed in the way that grief compressed into years could produce a surface composure over something fundamentally unhealed beneath. She asked 3 questions. Where exactly was he found? Had he suffered? And where was David? To the first question, Calloway showed her the map. To the second, she said, honestly, that she did not yet know. To the third, she said she intended to find out. The hatch had no business being there. That was Calloway's first thought when the deputy led her to it through the undergrowth. A 6-inch lip of corrugated steel, just visible beneath a decade's accumulation of needlefall and moss. It sat in a hollow between 2 root systems, in a section of the forest so dense and so poorly served by any trail that even experienced orienteers would have navigated around it. 8 years since the Carters had vanished, and this was the first human structure of any kind that the searches had produced. The deputy had found it by accident, following a compass bearing on a grid sweep ordered after Lucas's remains were re-examined. He had stepped into the hollow, and his boot had struck the metal, with a sound that carried wrong, hollow, constructed, and he had crouched down and scraped the needles away with his hands until the outline emerged. Calloway stood over it for 5 minutes before she touched anything, looking at the way the steel had been fitted, the care of the concealment. This was not opportunistic. This had been built and hidden with patience and specific intent. She pulled on gloves and lifted the handle. The smell came up first. Old air, sealed air. The particular staleness of a space that had been closed long enough to forget the outside world entirely. Then, as she descended by the rope the techs anchored to a root above, the space assembled itself in her flashlight beam. Concrete walls, rough-poured, close together, low ceiling. Along the right wall, a wooden shelf unit with rusted tin cans still in place, their labels gone or faded to illegibility. A folded emergency blanket, brittle with age. In the center of the room, bolted to the floor, a chair. Not a sitting chair in any comfortable sense. A chair with steel brackets along the arms, and a bracket at the base where something restraining had once been fixed. The brackets were empty now, but their orientation was unmistakable. On the far wall, Calloway raised her flashlight and went still. The name had been written in pencil, or scratched by something harder than pencil, in places where the pencil must have broken. Scratched directly into the concrete surface. Lucas. 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 It covered the entire wall, from a height of perhaps 4.5 feet down to the floor. Layered in repetition, some letters deliberate and careful, some frantic and nearly illegible, running together in long, spiraling chains, as though the hand that made them had not stopped because it could not afford to stop, because stopping meant something that could not be allowed to happen. Calloway stood at the wall for a very long time. Her flashlight did not waver. The sound of the creek was inaudible down here. The forest above was inaudible. The world had contracted to this space, and its recorded evidence of a boy who had tried to insist, in the only medium available to him, that he continued to exist. In the corner behind the chair, her technician found a coffee can with a cracked plastic lid. Inside it, wrapped in a piece of cloth that had been a shirt, were 3 objects. a playing card, the 7 of Hearts, a birthday candle, burnt down to its last inch, its wick black, and a folded piece of paper, the folds pressed flat and careful, as though it had been refolded many times. The handwriting on the paper was an adult's, slanted, urgent, written in the compressed cursive of a man who had spent time choosing his words. If this is ever found, it means we did not get out. My name is David Carter. My son Lucas is with me. We were taken on the night of September 4th, 2014, by a man who approached our campsite after dark. He gave his name as Ethan Cole. He said he was injured. I helped him. I let him inside the camp. I thought I was doing the right thing. He had a second man with him, outside in the trees. I did not see the second man until it was too late. They moved us at night. I do not know how far we walked. Lucas was very brave. He did not make a sound the way they told him not to. When we reached the underground room, they put Lucas in the chair, and they told me to keep him calm, to tell him it was temporary, that we were being kept here for safety while something was resolved. I told Lucas that. I told him whatever I could to keep him from panicking, from trying to resist, from giving them a reason. I told him that people were listening for us, that help was coming, that we had to be patient and quiet. He believed me. He tried so hard to believe me. Cole kept coming back, sometimes with the other man, sometimes alone. He never explained why he had taken us. He spoke the way men speak when explanation seems beneath them, as though the fact of his power was its own sufficient logic. I fought him once. He broke 2 of my fingers and told me that if I tried again, he would take Lucas somewhere I could not follow. I don't know how long we were there. I lost count of days after the first 2 weeks. Cole took Lucas away one night and did not bring him back. He told me Lucas had been moved somewhere safer. I have not been able to make myself believe this. I know what it means when men like this say someone has been moved. I have buried this where I think they will not find it. If you are reading this, please find my son. Please find what happened to him. And please know that I tried. I tried everything I knew how to try. He was 14 years old, and he was the best person I have ever known. Below the letter's main text, in writing so small it required a magnifying glass to read during evidence processing, a single additional phrase had been pressed into the paper along the bottom margin. Cole said he had done this before. He said he was not working alone. He said there were others, farther north, who would carry on regardless. The evidence team cataloged the room until 2 in the morning. Calloway was the last one out. She climbed the rope into cold night air and stood above the hatch, the forest enormous around her. Its sound returned as though it had been waiting. The stars were sharp through the canopy gap. She could see her breath. She had worked missing persons and homicide cases for 19 years. She had stood in a great many terrible places. But standing at the hatch above that concrete room, with its scratched and repeated name, she felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel, which was the full, specific weight of what human cruelty could make of time and of a child. She stood there until the weight became something she could carry again, the way it had to become something you could carry. And then she walked back through the dark forest toward the road where the vehicles were parked and their lights were on. Ethan Cole was not a ghost, but he had built himself to resemble one. His name appeared twice in law enforcement databases before 2014. A misdemeanor in Washington State in 2001. A vehicle stop in Northern California in 2008 that had produced nothing chargeable. A photograph from the 2001 arrest showed a man in his mid-30s, angular face, unremarkable except for the quality of his attention in the image. The kind of person who watches rather than speaks,
whose stillness registers as either patience or the absence of conscience. After 2008, Ethan Cole ceased to exist in any official record. No tax filings, no driver's license renewals, no death certificate. He had walked into the administrative silence between systems and disappeared there as completely as he had made others disappear in the forests of Oregon. Calloway requested assistance from the FBI's Violent Crimes Unit in April 2023 and received it. Analysts cross-referenced Cole's physical description and behavioral profile against unsolved disappearances in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho between 2005 and 2019. The results were not definitive. Certainty rarely was, at the distances involved. But 3 other cases shared sufficient structural similarities that the word pattern entered the official correspondence and was not removed. 3 other families, 3 other trips into remote forest, 3 other sets of belongings found in place, their owners missing. Not identical cases, the investigators were careful to note, but resembling one another in the way that crimes committed by the same mind over time come to resemble one another, even when the perpetrator believes they are being varied. David Carter's body was found in June 2023 by a forestry crew clearing blown timber from a ridge 2 miles north of the bunker site. He was beneath a cairn of stones laid with the same deliberate care as the concealment of the hatch. The cairn had been there long enough that moss had grown over the upper stones. His death had been caused by blunt force trauma to the skull. The forensic anthropologist who examined his remains noted healed fractures on his right hand, specifically the 2nd and 3rd metacarpals, consistent with the broken fingers he had described in his letter. He was buried in Portland in July, beside a plot that Claire had held open since Lucas's burial 4 years earlier. The service was attended by colleagues, family, and by Sergeant Paul Morrow, who had driven 4 hours from Grants Pass and stood at the back in a dark suit, looking at the coffin with the expression of a man settling a long debt that would not quite be paid. Claire Brennan spoke.
She stood at the lectern with her hands flat on its surface, not gripping, and she spoke for 11 minutes without notes. She spoke about who David had been before the divorce, and during it, and after it, and about the particular love he had carried for his son, which was the kind of love that did not simplify or condescend, that took the child seriously as a person with an inner life that deserved respect. She spoke about Lucas's journal and about the drawing she had found in his backpack, the river half-finished in charcoal. She said she had framed the drawing and it was on the wall of her house and would remain there. She said she did not forgive what had been done because she saw no purpose in framing forgiveness as an obligation. What she wanted was justice. What she wanted was for Ethan Cole to be found, and for whatever network of harm David's letter had suggested to be dismantled at its root. She looked directly at Calloway when she said this. Calloway did not look away. Before we go further, if this story has stayed with you the way it has stayed with everyone who has worked it, hit subscribe. Cases like this one deserve more than a single telling. New investigations, new evidence, new stories of the people the forests keep, every week, right here. In August, a development arrived that should have felt like progress, and instead felt like a fissure opening in the ground. A database search located an address connected to a defunct P.O. box that analysts linked through 3 degrees of alias to Ethan Cole. A property in a remote section of Lincoln County, Oregon, 20 acres of forest land recorded under a corporate name that had been dissolved in 2016. Deputies arrived to find a structure that had not been lived in recently, its windows dark, its door unlocked. Inside were signs of habitation extending over years. Cots, stored provisions, documentation they were still working through when Calloway received the second piece of information that same week. A man matching Cole's general description had been reported by a backcountry ranger in the Wallowa Mountains of eastern Oregon, moving through a roadless section without gear consistent with recreational use. The ranger had tried to close the distance. The man had gone into the timber and not been located again. In October, at a small public ceremony in Grants Pass, a memorial plaque was placed at the trailhead nearest the service road where the carter's truck had been found. Claire attended, standing at the edge of the small group, her hands loose at her sides. Calloway stood nearby. The plaque read simply, "David and Lucas Carter, remembered here and beyond this place." When the others had gone, Claire stood at the plaque with one hand touching the bronze letters. The river was audible in the distance. The forest pressed at the edges of the parking area, its presence enormous and unhurried. She stayed for a long time, her lips moving with words no one else could hear. Calloway waited at the trailhead until Claire returned to her car. They stood together briefly before parting. "We're still looking," Calloway said. Claire nodded. She looked at the tree line for a moment and then back at Calloway. The fading light caught the lines of her face, the particular exhaustion of a woman who had carried an unbearable thing for 9 years and expected to carry it further. "He's still out there," Claire said. "Cole. Whatever he built. It didn't end with David and Lucas. You know that." "I know it," Calloway said. Claire got into her car. Calloway stood in the parking lot after the taillights disappeared around the bend, the forest enormous at her back. She thought about David's letter and the margin note she had committed to memory the first time she read it. He said there were others, farther north, who would carry on regardless. She thought about the Wallowa sighting. She thought about the 3 other families and the 3 other trips that had ended in silence. She thought about the Lincoln County property and the documentation they were still working through, and about whatever was recorded in those papers that she had not yet fully read. The case file sat in her office, technically open, practically underfunded, reviewed by a federal analyst once per quarter. The sheriff had told her in September, gently and not without sympathy, that resources had limits, and that limits were a fact of the work. Calloway drove home on the forest road with her windows down, the cold air moving through the car. She passed the trailhead once more and glanced at the small bronze plaque, catching the headlights for a fraction of a second before the dark took it back. She thought about a boy writing his own name on a concrete wall over and over in the dark, insisting on himself, refusing to be erased. She pulled over on the empty road and sat with the engine running. After a while, she picked up her phone and opened the case file and began to read. If you have made it this far, you already know why this case refuses to let go. 3 other families. A man who walks into forests and does not come back out. A network that may still be active somewhere north of here, right now, tonight. Drop a comment below. Tell us what you think happened to Ethan Cole. Tell us if you believe David's final words, that he was not working alone. Because the file is technically open, and sometimes the person who finds the missing piece is not a detective at all. It is someone who was paying attention.